Misguided the Podcast. I'm your host, Matthew Facciani. Today I'm excited to bring you a fascinating conversation with Dr. Esha Lovrić, a sociologist, educator, and advocate for critical thinking whose personal journey across cultures and disciplines deeply informs her work. From her early experiences growing up between Fiji, New Zealand, and Australia, to working in spinal injury rehabilitation, and eventually earning a PhD in sociology, Esha has developed a compelling perspective on how we form beliefs, navigate identity, and seek truth in a complex social world. We talk about everything from the emotional landscape of life-changing events to the concept of liminality, that uncertain space between who we were and who we're becoming, and how those vulnerable moments make us more susceptible to misinformation or ideological movements. We also dig into how social media and parasocial relationships complicate our sense of connection and truth, and what it means to truly think critically in today's information overloaded world. Whether you are interested in sociology, misinformation, or just trying to understand your own thought patterns a little better, this conversation has something for you. Let's get into it. Esha, it's so great to talk with you, and thank you so much for coming on my podcast. I'm really excited to speak with you about all of your work and your work talking about critical thinking and sociology. But before we dive into what you're working on right now, I was curious if you could share with my listeners a little bit more about your journey into becoming a social scientist and into studying what you are studying right now.
Yes, thanks for having me, and hello to your listeners. Yes, so I'll start explaining to you how I even fell into all of this. My interest in sociology probably spans back to all the way back to my childhood. I was born in Fiji. I'm Fijian Indian ethnically. Our family left Fiji because of a political coup at that time. We moved to New Zealand and then to Australia. So I've had to learn to fit in socially as a child and straddle two cultures multiple times and figure out how to kind of succeed and work out the social rules of both. I went through it all. I experienced lots of social exclusion. I mean, it's kind of normal in the early days of, many migrants probably have a similar story of trying to figure things out in this new backdrop. So anyway, the social discomfort of that all was quite extreme, and so by default I was kind of always looking at, I didn't know then that I was critically analyzing, but I can see now that I was always having to kind of weigh up what's going on in these two different social worlds and the social rules, which were quite different between Indian and the Western and the Eastern type of cultures. There was a lot of thinking and reflecting on what was happening and what I was doing and my behaviors and how that was received and where my thinking came from or what the rules were. So that kind of got me interested, I guess, in social experiences of people and how they can be really different depending on where you were born or what culture you're exposed to. So later, after many years working on the front line with people, I made a call to my university because I wanted to learn how to conduct scientific research, and that turned into a full-blown sociological PhD. And once I got there, I started to learn and teach critical thinking and logical thinking and science. And part of critical thinking when we analyze social phenomena in sociological disciplines is that we learn something called reflexivity. So that's about where our ideas come from and what shapes our biases. And so this really helps us think about our thinking. So that, as I began to develop these critical thinking skills, that kind of answered a lot of my questions or a lot of my reflections that I had throughout most of my life about the differences in thinking and cultures and social experiences and constructions and where some of these biases come from and how we look at the world. So here I am. I'm a critical thinking advocate now to help understand ourselves first and then the world, hopefully.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you for sharing that journey. It's interesting to always see, the different backgrounds people come from and then how that can shape their interests in whatever field they're in, and also within social science. And, social science does have this self-reflection component. So it's interesting to hear your story of how learning about how we think about ourselves moved you towards critical thinking. So I'm curious, was there a particular thing about critical thinking itself that really resonated with you? Because you can have that like as a component of social science, but it seems like you really dove into wanting to understand critical thinking. Because I know you've also done some work with like healthcare and trust. So I'm just curious, like, when you're deciding on like a dissertation topic, for example, like how did that come about?
So I worked in the spinal injury unit for quite a while, for about 7 or 8 years, and I worked with a lot of patients who were experiencing spinal cord injury, and they were going through, of course, physical rehab, but there's a huge psychological aspect to that. And as I looked at what was happening there for these people, they were questioning a lot of what was going on for them physically, and the match between where they were psychologically and where they were physically was a big kind of gap between those two things. And I think that that made me really think about how the mind is still being very disconnected from the physical experience of the body. And that kind of got me down the path of researching the experience of people after major life-changing events and identity after life-changing event disrupts what you think you know about how you look at the world, which is what started my research in relation to therapeutic relationships, and I touch on power and liminality as concepts.
Yeah, that's fascinating. Can you share a little bit more about what you found working with these patients and how they navigated that liminality that you talk about, like being in these two spaces at once, or I guess how do you define liminality?
Yeah, so liminality is a period of time where we find ourselves in kind of a pocket of life. We go through it all the time, all of us, in different stages, where we find ourselves in a space that's very uncertain, or we don't really know the rules so much because we've come from somewhere and we're trying to get somewhere else, but it's kind of like an identity transitional space. It usually happens after we've certain stage in life we've arrived at, and something's happened in our social world where it's disrupted our identity or disrupted life as we knew it in some way, and we find ourselves kind of thrust into a little bit of a dark space or a dark patch in life, and we have to try and figure out how to get out of it. And in that space, you are very vulnerable psychologically and emotionally very vulnerable. And in these spaces, we can be very susceptible to different ideas and perhaps information that might not be quite right for us because of that vulnerability. So it's really important when we're in liminality that we have time and space to move through it in the way that we need to, so that we can come out of it integrated between ourselves, who we were, and who we want to be, and not be rushed through that process. It's very, very important that we can kind of go through it at our own pace.
Yeah, for sure. And that certainly resonates with some of the work that I've been doing, looking at the social psychology of how we process information and connecting that to our identities and our emotions. So, so I was curious if you could speak more about that and how these emotional components and identity components interact with critical thinking. Like, how can people start recognizing these potential blind spots and biases in their daily life?
Yeah, so I think I read one of your articles that you had sent out in your weekly newsletter. Who is more susceptible to conspiracy theories? There was some synergy between that newsletter that you had sent out and my work here. People who find themselves feeling quite vulnerable are kind of feeling like that their feet are off the ground, so they're not feeling in control. So in these periods, we may be more susceptible to believing or being included or finding ourselves connected to a group or jumping in with a group that give us that validation or feeling of control back. But it may not be particularly right for us because, and this kind of goes back to our increased amount of time that we are online. Generally, people in their lives might go through a liminal phase where they're feeling uncertain and their identity is going through some sort of transitional phase, and they're spending time online, which is very out of context to their real lives. And they may be feeling very vulnerable emotionally, but some groups online or groups of people online might make them feel instantly validated or feeling more in control. And this is how some of these ideas kind of take hold when people who are feeling not heard or disempowered, which happens when we're in liminal stages or phases, may be able to be more susceptible to these types of ideas that might not be very accurate or more conspiratorial or ideological in nature.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's so interesting to hear that perspective because That definitely aligns with the research that I've been doing, looking at how perceived victimhood can increase a vulnerability to believing conspiracy theories. And yeah, that common thread is, seeking out agency and wanting to be heard. And when we're in these positions, that's when, we're most vulnerable to wanting to believe what someone's telling us that can help us, feel better. Like when we're in these vulnerable states. And it's unfortunate that there's some people who take advantage of this and will purposely try to mislead people. But then there's also other people on the other side who they're just clinging on to whatever they can to try to regain that agency and those feelings of control.
Yeah, and I think I think if we start to understand a little bit more about who are the types of people who are more likely to believe or join these kind of movements that are ideological based or are conspiratorial, it is a type of kind of, I guess, an exploitation of the vulnerable mind. I know that's quite extreme to say it like that, but it kind of is, because somebody's so vulnerable, they're easily able to be manipulated cognitively just because they desire acceptance, which we all do. And particularly when we're feeling down, we want our feet to be back on the ground, or to feel that it's firmly on the ground. And one of the things that I just want to say is that these kind of ideas that are adopted that are out of context are where the problems lie, because people who are going through difficult or vulnerable stages in their life need to really go through that with a lot of introspection during that period and time. And they really need the people around them who they trust and have good relationships with or good alliances with, that do want or are looking out for them and their well-being and have their best interest at heart. Whereas these groups online, or the people online, they are completely out of context of the person's real life and have no idea about the personal goals, needs, desires, hopes, dreams, connections, or what they value in their real life. So there is a real vulnerability here and a real bigger issue that can come out of this.
Yeah, that's such a critical point. And it's unfortunate that these influencers, or however you wanted to define them, who take advantage of people in these vulnerable states, which we all can be vulnerable to these types of states depending on where we are in our lives. But you make that point. There's this difference between having that strong social support network of people you know and trust and people you don't know on the internet.
Mm-hmm.
And I was wondering if we could speak more about, social media and these parasocial relationships that we can develop with people that we might start thinking they do have our best interests in heart because they're in our phone every day and they're constantly saying, like, I'm going to help you, even though they might not. So, like, how do we navigate that?
So I think this is the bigger issue about how we are now becoming as a society or as a culture in particularly Western spaces, where people are very much online and enthralled in the digital world. And there's such a lessening of that social interaction with people, that this kind of human connection and all the positives that come out of building those human connections and the time you need to build those human connections, we just are no longer participating in those social processes because there's so much happening online. There's so many digital distractions constantly, and that's quite exhausting cognitively. So I just see how people are not really having the cognitive space. There's just no cognitive space to participate in some of those really important, deep conversations that you need person to person, because they think, or our brains are telling us that we don't need them anymore because we're getting so much online. But I think it's just an exhaustion, and there's just no space to do that. So I think what's happening, potentially what could be happening, is because we don't have such strong real world community connections and we are spending so much time online, we still need that validation. We still need to feel seen. So it's happening online, and so we can almost be tricked that these people really do have our best interests at heart, and you're believing these people, that they are looking out for you, but it's just our brains playing tricks on us, right? It feels good, but perhaps if we have more education or more awareness of what's actually happening to us, what we need, what our bodies needs, as well as our body needs, as well as our mind, and we start to reintegrate that body-mind connection again, we can start to build those social connections again that give us that really good feeling, so we won't be drawn to these online groups or these ideas.
Yeah, absolutely. So you're saying if we can facilitate these in-person connections more, then we won't be as vulnerable to getting that kind of fake superficial validation that can make us feel good, and that allows us to have the cognitive energy to be more resilient against misinformation. So it's kind of like how our society is structured and how we can increase interaction with people. Is that kind of, am I understanding your point?
Well, that's my point. And I think what's happening online in our, hugely information-driven world is that people are taking a lot of information online, whatever they're seeing, sounds good, it sounds smart, or it sounds intelligent, and then they take it back to their real lives. And this is causing friction because this out of context information is being dumped into the real world at a stage where other people in their real world contexts are probably not ready to process that information because it's so out of the order of their social development or whatever they're up to in their normal lives. And so perhaps that's even causing a friction between family members or community members, which we're seeing. We're seeing less connection in society between neighbors and people in communities in the Western world. And this is potentially one of the reasons, because of the disjointed beliefs, values, and ideas that everybody has, are very individualistic values and ideas that are coming from people and coming to the dinner table each night.
Yeah, that's such an important point, because it used to be where we would have much more shared experiences. We would see each other in person more. We didn't have social media. Even with like cable television, there was less television channels, so there was more people watching the same thing and having the same experience. And now everything has become so hyper personalized that your social media algorithm is tailored just for you and just for what you click on. And with AI, that makes it even more personalized and really just getting all your data and saying, okay, this is what you want to click on, and we're going to show you exactly what only you click on, so you spend as much time on social media as possible. And I worry about this. I worry about how this is going to accelerate this fracturing of our society. And I know this is a big question, but I'm just curious, like, what do we do about it? Like, how could we start, turning back those forces? Like, education's important. Understanding our biases is important, but when we think about other ways that we can try to correct this process, what do you think that we can do both on an individual level and then also like big picture macro level, if you could wave a magic wand?
Well, what I always go back to thinking about is what helped me. What helped me do that? And I went through, I was raised in a very conservative environment where I was told what to think and how to think. And then when I started learning critical thinking, my mind just expanded because I was able to think through my thoughts and understand where they came from. And this was a very liberating thing. But that took a long time. And as academics, we know that when we start to learn scientific thinking, that takes a long time. We get told consistently that's not objective writing, or go back to the drawing board, come back. And that takes many, many years to develop that kind of ability to think critically and apply that in your writing and your thinking. So I think to expect people to do that is unfair, because quite quickly in their own lives, because most people are just thinking contextually and most people are thinking subjectively. They've never even been taught to think any differently. And usually we just think deeper about elements or what's right or what's not right if something happens in our lives that make us think deeper or think more critically. We are not thinking critically about everything at all times. We just don't have the cognitive space to be able to commit that much effort to that process. So I really think that, well, I don't know, but potentially the only way is slow education and people who have been trained to critical thinking and scientific thinking can provide education and leadership, but also in a way that it can be relatable to the everyday person. So why should they listen to us? Why should they adopt information? So there needs to be a value in the information that they're listening to, and we probably have a responsibility to make it understandable to their lives, rather than so difficult to understand how to actually connect scientific knowledge to their actual lives in context.
Yeah, absolutely. I definitely agree with that. I think we do have such a privilege to be academics and study these topics and learn all these really cool things. So then I think there's some obligation to share that with the broader public. And the challenge is we're not always incentivized to do so within our academic systems, right? So in the United States, there usually isn't much reward for academics and scientists to do any sort of public outreach. You know, you're rewarded for grants and publications, but if you do a bunch of interviews or explain your research to a bunch of different people, you kind of get a pat on the back for most of the time. And, you know, that's really unfortunate that we're relying on science communicators to do this in their spare time instead of having a funding model that allows for it. So I would like to see more resources spent on communication. And I think we are finally starting to see some of that. I don't know how it is in Croatia, if you see any positive developments there, but I think now that we're seeing so much chaos in the United States with our institutions and our universities, that we're like, okay, now we actually have to invest in explaining why these institutions matter and also doing a better job of connecting with people and their communities.
Yeah, we're definitely going through the same thing where I don't have any funding to run my social media platforms or to present the information to the public. I'm doing it all on my own back and my service to humanity, I guess. And it is really difficult because we do have to try and earn money and support ourselves, but also we have this kind of ethical drive, or I do myself, because I have this knowledge and I would like to share it. And also as a sociologist, I got into this because I actually do want to help people make good decisions for their social and psychological health. So it is a very difficult thing when you don't have the means to be able to do that for people because of funds.
Yeah, absolutely. But, you know, you're doing a great job with your newsletter. And when I follow you on Threads, I always find your posts so interesting. And I'm just curious, like, where you would like to go next? Like, where do you see yourself in the future? Do you want to continue this public-facing format where you're sharing critical thinking? Do you have, like, different research ideas? What's next on the horizon for Esha?
So I will continue with Threads and social media. It is a little bit difficult because there is a little bit of a clash of ethics there for me as well, because it can be really difficult to consistently be posting and running social media and have all the distractions that come with social media, because I don't actually think it is very healthy. But then again, I do want to put out this information and be a mouthpiece and be able to educate as well. So I will continue that, but as with anything, sometimes it's a little bit difficult to manage it all. On the other side of things, here in Croatia, there is a lot of space to develop some of the innovation hubs and the thinking hubs. So potentially I may like to open up a critical thinking or educational school here for the young people. A lot of people are leaving Croatia because there are not a lot of opportunity economically to stay. However, and the schooling system is quite rooted in kind of traditional methods of thinking. So there's probably room for some new ways of educating the young people so that they can maybe tap into the new world of global entrepreneurship, or be able to work in areas that they want to, where they can contribute value and kind of build that social confidence and psychological well-being for themselves. So maybe some of that.
Yeah, I mean, that sounds great. I think that would help many people and be able to expand how we think about teaching how to think. I am always interested in the space of critical thinking communication and science communication, and how it can best connect with more people, whether that's in the traditional classrooms or whether that's through social media. I think it's something that we absolutely need, and we need more people doing, even though it's very challenging, as we discussed, with the lack of funding and the challenges of just being on social media, with the ethical issues with that, and the just mental health issues of being on these platforms all the time.
Yes, it's not easy. And we are just doing it all in our free time. And I guess trying to preserve our energy and our own sanity as well, so that we can actually do the best work that we can as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's critical. I try to take breaks on social media. Sometimes I'll like set timers on my phone and stuff, so I'm not on too much. I'm curious for you, do you have any techniques for navigating social media as a sociologist, trying to share these ideas, but then not be bogged down by all the negatives of social media as well?
Well, I'm not that great actually with what to do. I'm still trying to work it out. I probably need to have a better system. Sometimes it's a little bit difficult to manage all of the comments and expectations of the person who's running the account. This can be very, very difficult because you're engaging with every single idea, every single person, and from the context which they're expressing their views. And this can be particularly exhausting and very difficult, especially since I know that everybody's ideas are contextual, and so my version or how I'm teaching may not fit with everybody. So that can be very difficult to navigate. I don't have any tips. I think that we just need to make sure that we're not, it's not, as soon as we feel like it's encroaching into our mental well-being, we do need to have some space between social media and ourselves, and also make sure that you have certain rules around when you are looking at it and when you're not, so that you can protect yourself and your family as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I think being mindful of it and trying to be aware of our own limitations whenever we feel like we're being pulled in too many directions, I think that's a good indicator to pull back. And yeah, it's always a challenge for me too, of like, how much do I want to engage with people? Like, I'm the only one managing my social media platform, so I see a bunch of comments sometimes, and yeah, I can't respond to all of them, and sometimes I don't want to. And it's like, it's a trade-off of, yes, I want to be accessible, I want to share this knowledge, but I'm also a human being and I have limitations. So I try to find that balance of sharing as much as I can without being burnt out.
That's exactly right. And I think we are only human at the end of the day, and it is really difficult to manage all of this. And I do wonder where it's going to all go and how we are all going to be able to manage all of these different things that we're trying to do without losing our minds.
Yeah, I mean, that's definitely the big question of the day is, how do we navigate this space? And, I think it's going to take a collective effort of educators and scientists and people who have studied these types of topics working together and trying to work together with lots of different people in different spaces, different backgrounds, different careers. I often talk about the necessity of social scientists and people in the humanities working with technologists. So we're developing this technology with an ethical framework. So there's all these different big problems that I think are important to address, and it's going to take a collaborative effort to do so.
Yeah. I really do want to add to that as well, that I do think that academics, we do need to shift towards a more interdisciplinary methods or approaches to try and integrate the different knowledges that we have to contribute, because there are so many interconnections, and all the different domains and disciplines that we do study and that have become formalized disciplines in the academy, there's a reason for that, and that's because it's reflective of how human beings behave and think and feel and interact. And so there are so many interconnections and intersections between them, and I think this siloed kind of disciplinary conversations are not very good. We do need to have the overlapping conversations, which is very reminiscent of the human experience anyway.
Yeah, absolutely. Totally agree with that. And I definitely advocate for interdisciplinary work and going outside our bubbles. And, it can be challenging. It can be cognitively taxing, and it can be scary to do that. But I think collectively, if we kind of embrace that together, then I think it'll be better for everybody.
Agreed. Completely agreed.
Excellent. Well, Esha, it was so great talking with you today. I'm curious, where can people find you if they want to follow your writing and your work? Where are you online?
Well, if you want to find me, you can find me on Threads at Dr. Esha Lovrić, or you can go to my website, which is dreshalovrić.com. I think Matthew will be kind enough to write that name out so that you know how it's spelled.
Yes, absolutely. So Esha, thank you so much for joining me. I really enjoyed our conversation, and I look forward to seeing all the work that you'll be doing in the future.
Thank you very much, Matthew, and I've really enjoyed this conversation, and I hope your listeners have enjoyed it too.